is a Tab Media special report on the national rollout of TheManChurchcom. I'm Jennifer Rash, and joining me is Rick Burgess, author, speaker, and radio show host. Welcome, Rick.
Hey, Jennifer, thanks for having me on today, and excited to talk about TheManChurchcom. All of my friends and family can tell you, do not ask Rick about TheManChurch.com unless you're ready to talk about it.
Well, I was given a hint that all I had to do was introduce, and then I could sit back. It would be all right. You would just take care of everything.
Well, co-hosting the Rick and Bubba show, that's definitely my day job, and we have to talk 4 hours a day. So all you have to do really is just roll us the ball, and we'll run with it.
And you're set. All right. All right. Well, okay. So help us understand national rollout, number one, and then TheManChurch.com. We'll get into what all of that means as far as men's ministry, but start with the main concept of TheManChurch.com. What is it, and what are you going to do with this nationally?
Well, we found out a long time ago, this is not a new concept. I even remember, we'll get into this in a minute, when my pastor, when I walked in, I said, I think that God is calling me to a discipleship strategy for men's ministry. And of course, he wasn't surprised by that, because men's ministry has been pretty inadequate in all churches, not just Baptist churches, for far too long. There was a time I heard one of my mentors, Steve Farrar, talking about, you don't even hear the term, hey, he's a God-fearing man anymore. That used to be one of the greatest attributes you could say about someone, meaning that they had wisdom because they feared God. And what I found is that in my own life and the life of most men, is the church on Father's Day will tell us about the influence that is biblically sound, that God gave a man, and that men and women are equal, clearly, but they're not the same. And the man's role is unique, and the woman's role is unique, equal, but unique. And we hear about us being the spiritual leader, and they do the Barna research about the influence of the man in the house. And, if the man becomes a follower of Jesus, there's nothing in the house that quite, rises to the influence that God gave a man. And then usually it's never spoken about again the rest of the year. And usually what we find is the men are frustrated. They're challenged, as we should be, but then they say, well, what do you mean? What is a spiritual leader? What are we supposed to do? And we found that the equipping part for men was really, really lacking. So we started putting together, what if we came up with a hub, TheManChurch.com, where a church or an individual man could plug in and find, say you're an individual man, find resources that were made by men for men, because frankly, you can't really disciple men if you talk to them like they're a woman or a child. And you shouldn't try to disciple a woman by speaking to her like she's a man or a child. And you shouldn't try to disciple a child by speaking to them like they're a woman or a man, or an adult. So we wanted it to have a tone to it that was uniquely male, because there is a toxic masculinity, but there's also a biblical masculinity. And we thought, well, if you want to pursue masculinity correctly, then it's fallen like everything else, because of the fall of mankind and the first Adam that made the mistake of not being who he was supposed to be, but then he was replaced by a new Adam. And that's when God decided to be a man. So now we have a perfect example. So we have a second curriculum that is launching in March, but our first curriculum launched last March. And if you don't think that the adversary hates men's ministry, it launched right when the pandemic hit. So we had to find ways to adjust where men could do that virtually, and we've done that, or they can do it in groups together. However, but if you go to TheManChurch.com, you could literally, no exaggeration, Jennifer, you could go there as a church and do a turnkey, and we'll give you 40 weeks worth of curriculum. We'll even help you with speakers and teachers for the gatherings. We looked at Exodus 34:23 and Deuteronomy 16:16, where we see God go into Moses and saying 3 times a year, bring me the men. I want to talk to the men in their own gathering without the women and children 3 times a year. Well, we don't know why Moses was not on a quarter system, but the United States of America is on a quarter system. So we thought, well, the men should gather in some way, shape, or form 4 times a year, where now we'll do high challenge with a speaker or a teacher. And some of this is similar to how men's ministry has been done in the past. But what we found was sorely missing was the high equipping. So what we do is after the high challenge, we encourage and we coach the churches to then put the men into a 40-week curriculum of small groups where they now are not just getting the challenge, but they're also getting the equipping. Because if you just have challenge with no equipping, it just leads to frustration. And then if you have equipping with no challenge, it leads to apathy. So we believe, like a wheel turning, that these two things work together. Now, also at TheManChurch.com, if you want us to come in and do an event with your men, we can do that. If you want to go there as an individual and get some of our 40-day devotionals, you can do that. And we even have a place where we have other authors that we suggest that have also put out some good material that is for men. But the thing that makes us unique is the curriculum. We believe that we are one, if not the only, one of the very few that offer a full year curriculum designed for men.
For men. Okay. So I think what I'm understanding then from what I looked on the website and then what you just said, this is a supplement to a church. You're not a church in and of yourself, correct? You're a resource for church families.
Yeah, the name ManChurch came from the gatherings. When we
Right.
started it at my home church where I was for 21 years, I just recently went to a new church, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but at Shades Mountain Baptist Church in Birmingham, we started thinking, what should we call these services where the men gather? And so we thought, well, let's just call it what it is, ManChurch, meaning this is church designed for the males of the church to come in to where the worship is led by men, the singing are men. If you've never heard men sing praises to the Lord, even though our voices all may not be great, just hearing that male voice sing together and worship the Lord is really something. And it also gets us in an environment just like we heard from the Bible in Exodus and Deuteronomy, where we are in our own service. And sometimes even if the pastor is heading it up, a pastor can't go into a service that has women and children and men together and speak directly to the men every time, because that's not appropriate either. Because so there needs to be a place where that pastor, either through other speakers and teachers or himself, can have the men in a room with him and speak to them about the things that need to be addressed that involve the men of the church. And then over time, you set up, here's mission opportunities for men. Here's a widow that needs some men to come over and repair things at her house or move some trees. Here's some single moms that have sons that have no mentors. And so you have an ongoing system throughout the year where you really can go to the men for any needs of the church as well.
Hmm. Okay, so help us understand. We can tell you're very passionate about this and that you're really putting a lot of thought into it. How did you land in men's ministry, and maybe back up and even tell us how you ended up, tell us your faith story and how you landed here.
Well, it was, I realized that for a lot of men, especially being from the South, even though this is going out nationally, and we have churches about 122. I tried to get you a number right before we came on. I think we're at 122 churches as of today, and most of those are in the South, but they're also all over the country, even into Canada and the Bahamas. But nationally, it being raised in the South, and America has this problem overall, but it was mainly in the heartland, the South, and that's cultural Christianity, where you're raised up in a family, and Christianity is not the center of the house, but it's part of the culture. And you go to church and we have a culture, almost a social gathering. This is nothing abnormal in the Bible Belt. It's part of the culture. And the only problem is sometimes we end up with a type of faith, and I certainly did, that was really more cultural than it was transformative. Meaning it had its place and I didn't have any problem with it, but it wasn't really a filter that all my decisions went through. So when I became a young adult, I left the church and didn't return for 13 years. And I was living a life of perpetual deliberate sin. It wasn't that I was making mistakes. I was living as First John chapter 2 and chapter 3 would say, your life doesn't really reflect the power of God's seed transforming your spirit. We're not talking about legalism or code of conduct, but we are talking about obedience and the fruits of the Spirit, which, Jesus says in John 15, if you abide in me and I abide in you, I produce fruit in you that proves you are my disciple. First John chapter 2, verse 4-6 says, anyone that says they're with him but doesn't obey him is a liar, and the truth is not in that person. He goes on to chapter 3 and says, if God's seed abides in you, then you should not continue to live in sin. And this is what separates the children of God and the children of the devil. We're not talking about stumbles. We're not talking about perfection, but we are talking about fruit and obedience. And, Romans chapter 6, Paul says, let me clarify grace here. You have been freed from sin, but you have not been freed to sin. You were once doulos, a bondservant to your sin, but now that you've been redeemed, you're going to be a bondservant to obedience. Talking about, we're really just saying God has the power to change people, and to say otherwise doesn't say much about God. So I was sadly had abused marriage, meaning I got divorced in a 2-year marriage, and met my wife, praise the Lord, and I was at a church with a Southern Baptist pastor that I went in to get married in the town where we were working, and met each other. And he questioned why I wanted to get married in his church. And I said, well, you're halfway between where her family lives and my family lives. And he
Makes
said,
sense,
well,
right?
yeah. And he said, what church do you attend? And I said, well, I don't have a home church. And then I said that idiotic statement, you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. And he said, well, legalistically, you're right, but I've just never known anyone that had been truly redeemed that doesn't desire to go to church. People don't go to worship God, but to earn their salvation. They go to worship Him because of their salvation. It's a response to redemption. And he began to point out things in my life that were not stumbles. They were not mistakes. They were perpetual, deliberate sin. And he said, I'm not going to marry you. And I said, oh, are you somebody that won't marry me because I've committed the sin of divorce? It was interesting that I knew it was sin. And he said, no, I don't even know the details of that. I'm not saying you're unredeemable. He said, I'm not going to marry you because you're lost. And see, that was a man speaking to a man in a very frank way.
Wow.
And God made men to be challenged. And my first challenge was to kind of bristle up a little bit until I realized I couldn't make a case against him. And he said, there's no proof that you've been saved, that you've been redeemed. And so I went home, and I lived in Alabama. So my house had a lot of Bibles, as all Alabama houses do. But I had more Bibles than I knew Bible verses. And I couldn't figure out, because I knew that I was a little boy. I knew I went to church. I knew I was in the church culture. I knew my family called us a Christian family. And I was kind of taken back by how I'd ended up this kind of man. And so I just went to my Bible, and in God's sense of humor, it fell open to James chapter 4, which I didn't even get that joke, because James is a very high challenge book. And I looked at chapter 4, and I saw verses 7 and 8, and I saw the word in English, submit. Submit yourself then to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he'll come near to you. And it just clicked. And I thought to myself, see, being a male, submit, resist, come near, action, action, action. And I realized that I was the authority of my life. I realized that I did not resist the devil. I toyed around and immersed myself in sin all the time. And I realized that I was not near to God. I was actually distant, because that was evident in my life. And so I just got on my face in that house, and I said, Lord, forgive me. I want to submit completely to your authority. I don't like the man that I am. And I do want to reject the devil and his authority over my life. I want to reject my own authority. And I repent and turn from my sins. I remember learning the word about repentance. And I want to turn to you. And I know that you love me, because I know the story of the cross, but I have come to the conclusion that I don't love you. So you teach me to love you. And he redeemed me. And my wife and I, this Wednesday, on February the 10th, we will celebrate 25 years,
Wow.
not of just being married, but of being redeemed. We were redeemed together in pre-marriage counseling, and we were married. And I remember my wife saying, when we were on that prayer bench, she said, for the first time in both of our lives, she said, for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And so we have been doing ministry together. But the point was, I realized that if that pastor, that man, had not spoken to me like a man, where would I be? Did it make me uncomfortable? Yes. Was it a high challenge? Yes. But I tell people all the time, stop trying to avoid discomfort. Discomfort saved my life. And so I thought to myself, well, that's the way men's ministry should look. And I frankly did not see that very many places. And I started realizing that most men's ministry was designed, and I read the first time Man in the Mirror with Pat Morley, and he said it correctly. He said, we keep trying to treat symptoms. We talked to a man about his lack of sexual purity and lust. We talked to men about finding their identity in their jobs and not in Christ. And their hobbies mean more to them, this and that, all these things. And he said, but these are just symptoms. The disease is this man is either lost or he's never been discipled. He's a spiritual infant. And so, and then just the logic. I mean, Jennifer, the logic, if we believe all the things that we hear about the influence of men, and everywhere I've ever been in society that's chaotic and disastrous, the men have left, or they're not owning up to their responsibilities. So if you go and you disciple men, you'd fix a lot of problems. So just the logic side of me said, men's ministry is where there should be a tremendous amount of effort placed, because if you're fixing men, and only Christ can do that, man, you fix a lot of things. And so I went to our pastor after Sherry and I were discipled 3 years in Oxford, Alabama. Then we went to Shades Mountain Baptist Church. And I was doing a lot of youth stuff then, with being on the radio and giving my testimony and all that. And I just kept being drawn to men's ministry because of this concept in my mind. If we believe the things we say we believe every Father's Day in churches all across this country, why is men's ministry last in the priority of the church and not first, or at least equal?
Right.
With the youth, the children, the adult classes, and the women, it should at least be equal. And what I found with a lot of Western churches is they're designed to bring women and children to them, but a lot of these churches don't speak to men. And so what we find is the woman comes in as a spiritual leader, the children come in with mama, and then the husband and the dad just kind of follows in, kind of not real enthusiastically, going, nothing here really speaks to me. And as soon as I can get done with this and get this obligation off my list. And what I found was there's a lot of women that, now there's women that are in sin, that have a kind of a Jezebel spirit. They're trying to circumvent the leadership of their husband. But I found that's probably a small percentage. Most of the women have no desire to be the spiritual leader of their home. They just have to be. So probably some of the biggest fans of TheManChurchcom have been women who said, now my husband is finally becoming the spiritual leader we all prayed and hoped he would be, because he's found a place where he can grow. He's found something that speaks to him like a man. So I went and talked to the pastor, Danny Wood, and I said, I think we have this system of the 4 times a year we'll gather together and we'll do small groups. Now, we didn't have a curriculum at that time. We were just creating, each individual teacher would come up with their own curriculum, and we would plug them into the small groups. And we did that for 6 years. And we had a man named Steve Grissett who was in the men's ministry at Shades Mountain. And he came to me and he said, I believe that God spoke to me last night. I'm telling you, you're supposed to take this out nationally. I think this system will work in churches all across this country, because we've never, ever in the history of this church had a men's ministry that is continuing and lasting, and it never stops, and it's never over, and it's never, falling away, because this system doesn't allow it to. And I think you're supposed to take this nationally. So I got to work on that. Before that, I'd just been sending emails to churches that asked us about it. And so last March, the national launch of that strategy that started in my local Baptist church went out to the entire country. And here we are, about almost approaching the end of the first year. And the pandemic has affected it quite a lot. But still, there's 122 churches. And the feedback that we really are just now getting, because some churches bought the curriculum, then they couldn't start it. And then we had some that said, well, we'll find a way. So we've only got a handful of churches that have finished the first year and they're ready for the next curriculum. Most of them are just now getting started. And the fruit that we are seeing is very, very encouraging. And so that's kind of the nutshell story of how, and God woke me up. I mean, he did. He woke me up in the middle of the night before that first meeting with the pastor. And I woke up and I heard him saying, I'm calling a remnant I'm going to call a remnant. And I remember thinking to myself, I like going to speak places, making everybody mad and leave. Lord, please, Lord, please don't make me get my hands dirty and actually disciple these men. And so the Lord said, this is what I want you to do. So I don't know if you've ever been in rebellion against the Lord. It's not a good place to be. So I do whatever he says. And it has been an incredible journey. And I will tell you, I hope you sense my enthusiasm. I'm very excited because I think now more than ever, this country desperately needs godly men, desperately needs God-fearing men, but we have to equip them. We can't just say that to them.
Right. Well, and it makes sense because you mentioned how you just got it started and then the pandemic happened and you had to shift to online thinking and all the things, and a lot of people did have to put it on hold. So in a way, even though you've been going a year, it's almost like you get a fresh start now and get to
Right.
kick back out and relaunch this thing. But something you said just now made me think, the whole getting your hands dirty, the messiness of discipleship. Do you think that that's part of the reason why it is hard to find churches that really dedicate themselves to to men's ministries and to discipling men?
I do think that's part of it. It is very difficult. Men are extremely frustrating, and I think one of the things I would say to the church is disciple those that are willing to be discipled. I think sometimes the difficulty of it, we just throw our hands up, and there might be. I'll just tell you this. Now, you talk about something that is anti-church uh, uh, strategy. Is our system will not grow your men's ministry. All it'll do is draw out a powerful men's ministry. We
No.
started out with 600 men at Shades Mountain, and when I did my last ManChurch service in January of this year for that particular church that had been my home for 21 years, we have men that are still involved at about 220.
Okay.
But those 220 have been transformed in their spiritual maturity, and they'll transform the environment of the church. So it will be a remnant.
Right.
It probably won't be something that you go, wow, our men's ministry on our first man church, we had, based on the size of the church, 100 men. Now we have 40, but those 40
Right.
are mature followers of Jesus now. And so don't get caught up in that. You keep going, well, the men say they want this, and now look, most of them aren't coming. That's all right. Take care of the ones who are.
Mm.
That's what this is about. I don't know if you know that, but when and we both do, if you look at scripture, as Jesus started getting more followers, he didn't take the message and make it softer. He actually made the message more challenging to purge and weed out those that weren't serious about following him. His one time he goes from 120 back down to 12. So that's okay. And we want it to be when I say the word difficult, I don't mean it like it's unpleasant. What I mean is we want it to be high challenge. Men love to be challenged. I think more men would follow Jesus if we told them it was difficult to do so. We've made Jesus out to be a hippie, and men don't really want to follow, this version of Jesus that isn't biblical. I mean, Jesus is saying in Luke 9:23, which is our theme verse, deny self. And that doesn't mean become a better version of yourself. That means you don't exist anymore. Pick up your cross daily and follow me. And so this was all really rough stuff, meaning picking up your cross daily. That means in the Roman Empire, people carrying crosses were going to die. So it's a true death to self, which is, could it be any more counterculture? Death to self. And Jesus is always counterculture. Death to self, men, and now you become part of me. Lose your individuality as far as you being the one that is being served, but you don't lose your personality. I now just take the personality I gave you and I redeem it. I mean, the Apostle Paul, his personality didn't change. He was a zealot for the wrong thing. Now he's just become a zealot for the advancement of the church versus persecuting the church. Jesus just takes the man like he made him and says, let me redeem that and get it going in the right direction. I'm still the same personality I've always had, but I'm not the same man. And because of Jesus, thank the Lord for that, changed me. But so I think if we told men that it's actually wide and easy is actually the road to destruction, and anybody can do that. Jesus said it's a narrow gate and it's hard to follow him, and only a few are willing to do it. See, I don't think a lot of men know that the Marines didn't come up with the few, the proud, the Marines. Jesus came up with the few, the humble, the disciples. You know
That's
what I mean?
that's
And
true.
I think that message resonates if we would just say it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, I was thinking, at my church, I'm at North Park Baptist Church in Trussville, and Pastor Bill Wilkes is very dedicated to discipling everyone, but has created some very strong men's discipleship groups, and they're
Good.
doing great work. How can the Man Church come alongside churches that are doing okay or really well in various discipling of men areas? What can it be part of that? Can it supplement?
Yeah. Oh, can it ever? As a matter of fact, those clients are the ones that we kind of go, oh, thank goodness we don't
Yeah.
have to start at zero with you.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
I think where we come in can be a strong resource for them is people like your pastor. They're probably having a difficult time finding curriculum that
Okay.
is designed for men. And
Okay.
so now it's wonderful if you have men mature enough to do expository teaching. That's great. But
Mhm.
I have found that a lot of men, until they get a little more mature in their faith, they're kind of intimidated by that. Oh no, you want me to teach a small group? I don't know that I can do that. So our curriculum is designed that I come on with a 12 to 15-minute video and kind of set up each session, and
Mhm.
then you can facilitate a group versus having to expository teach. We already have you a study guide. We have the verses, they're in the video. And what's so beautiful is watch the ones that are going through the 40 weeks and they get to a point where the study guide is not so much needed for them anymore. I mean, they like the verses, but they keep telling us, man, now the men are talking in the groups. And, a lot of times we don't even finish the study guide. And I'm like, well, fine, I'm not giving you homework.
Mhm.
I'm giving you things you need in case things do kind of, if they're not going anywhere, or the men are like, well, we're still sitting here. Well, here's something else you can discuss based on the themes. And we have 40 weeks. We do 5 weeks on each individual themes. That's the first curriculum called the pursuit. And
Mhm.
so the first 5 weeks are on identity because a man's got to know his identity first. And usually men have their identity in the wrong place. And then the next 5 weeks is integrity. And then we get into surrender and passion and compassion and integrity and and influence and passion. And so it's 40 weeks worth of these 5 weeks on each theme. The second curriculum, which is releasing now in March, is called Real Men of the Bible. Now we take 8 men and we do 5 weeks on each man. So yeah, for a church like yours, and we have individual 40-day devotionals that we design to from a series we call How to Be a Man. One
Mhm.
is the pursuit of Christ-centered masculinity. The second one is the real men of the Bible. And the third one just released, and it's what does it mean to be a disciple? So I would say to the church that already has the structure, we're probably a great source for you on curriculum and resources.
And you co-authored those 3 books, correct? With someone from Shades, or 2 different people from Shades, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, so the first one is Andy Blanks and me, and Andy Blanks is with Iron Hill Press. That's our publisher that publishes everything. And Andy's been in curriculum and publishing for years, mainly on the youth side. But
Okay.
now they now have a publishing side that's just for men called Iron Hill. The second one is Andy, Brian, Gill, and me. And then the last one is actually Brian, Andy, me, and then we added 5 other authors from
Wow.
from different churches, and each man took a 5-week subject. And so that's those. And then the curriculum is I do the videos, and then we have a team of men that put together the study guides that consist of Andy and Brian and me, but also some other men that we have that help write us the study, help us write the study guide. So if you already have structure and you don't need our structure, we can help you with speakers, we can help you with teachers, and we can help you with resources.
Okay. Okay. So with this being built out of Shades Mountain Baptist Church in Vestavia Hills, and so many of the connections that you have being there as well, what is it like then? You referenced it earlier, but you're now at Valleydale Church, I believe, right, in Birmingham.
Right.
Tell
Uh-huh.
us how that works, and why the shift and how all of that played out.
Well, the first thing that I want everyone to know, and clearly, and we sat down and had dinner with our pastor Danny Wood and his wife, and they have been dear friends for my wife and I. We have been through so much together. The death of our youngest son, we walked through that together. We've been through a lot together, and we built this discipleship strategy. And Sherry and I, my wife, we have taught the youth at our church. We've taught the children. Like I said, I've done the men's ministry there for the last 6 years. And our one of our sons, who is Phil, is being called to vocational ministry, and he is the creative producer. Had got hired at Valleydale. When Mac Brunson came there 2 years ago, the new pastor, I did some interim pastoring at Valleydale. Valleydale is literally 7 minutes from our house, and so I kept telling my wife, I said, we're being called to Valleydale. I don't really know why, so I did the interim pastoring as they were looking for a pastor, and I thought, well, that must be it. That's what he was calling me to, and we went on. And then every time I kept driving by, I was like, well, I'm still feeling this call to this church. And Sherry said, well, we need to pray about this. And so then they hired one of our sons to be their creative producer. And I went to him and I said, your mom and I are feeling a call to this church, and it may be time for us to make a change for the next thing God's calling us to. No indictment on Shades Mountain or anyone at Shades Mountain or the pastor. Honestly, just the next call. And, we had a pastor that discipled us for 3 years. And I told him when we left his church to move to Birmingham with the show, I said, you have done your job. God has called you into our lives and you've done your job. I looked Danny Wood in the face and I said, I want you to know you've done your job. We came to you as only 3 years followers of Jesus. So we had one pastor that taught us what it meant to be involved in a church and not just be cultural Christians. And then Danny took us from our 4th year as followers of Jesus and got us all the way, to year 25. And now Mac Brunson has been brought into our lives to take us, the next way, and as our current pastor. And so I asked my son, would it bother you if your mom and I decided to be part of the church where you work? We're not doing it because you're there, but that would be something neat. But I'm still going to do what the Lord tells me to do. But I'd like to know how you feel about it, because your mom and I don't come in quiet. It's
Right.
you may not want us there. And he got excited. He said, no, Dad, I think that would be great. Matter of fact, I'd love for you to come here and start the men's discipleship strategy here. And I can do some creative stuff with it and give you some, videos and some graphics and have some fun with it. So we may get to work together a little bit, which is really cool. And we've only been at Valleydale, like I say, for the last month. We've been visiting, going to both churches for a while, trying to confirm that call from God. But I can tell you that when Danny told me that he was going to announce his retirement, I didn't know that when we sat down and had a discussion.
Wow.
And he looked at his wife and they started smiling. And I said, what are we not in on? And he was like, are you coming to church this Sunday? And I said, we were actually going to join Valleydale this Sunday. He said, well, could you go one service Valleydale, one service Shades Mountain? And I said, sure. And he said, because I want you to be there, because I'm going to announce my retirement. And I thought, oh my goodness, we've run this guy out of the ministry. No, but no, it was. But I
He's
thought,
exhausted, Rick. 25 years of y'all. He's exhausted.
enough of you people. Now that somebody else is taking y'all on, I'm out. But I looked at that as more confirmation. God was ending, a period of time in our spiritual growth and was taking us to something new, not just for our benefit, but so we could also serve at another, church body. And we will certainly go all in serving there as well.
So Shades, I'm sure, will still be connected in some way, and you'll work this again. It's pretty much a virtual existence anyway, right? It's through the TheManChurchcom, and all the resources are packaged there.
Yeah, they're all there. You can go there and find everything. Now, a lot of the churches are meeting in person. A lot of the men's groups and small groups are meeting in person. You don't have to do it virtually. Like, it is designed with the videos and everything that if you wanted to still keep meeting on Zoom in your small groups, you could. If a lot of churches are still doing gatherings. We're going in with the spacing and doing the gatherings too. So it is set up, these resources, to be used virtually, or you can use them with men in the room. It works either way.
Well, one final question before we give the resources again. But you mentioned it, how you and Sherry come in, and people know you're there, and you do have a big personality. And obviously the Rick and Bubba show is, gosh, how many years now? Rick and Bubba show?
27
Yeah,
years.
27 years, and well-known and far-reaching. How do you keep this, the Man Church, how do you keep it from being personality driven and it actually be able to have feet without you necessarily being there?
Well, I can tell you this, just like with me feeling called to leave Shades Mountain, I assure you that those men are running it there's no need for me to be there, whether I'm there or not. It is established within those men. There's leaders that are involved. The young men, some of these guys have stepped up. So really, if God called me away from the ManChurch.com tomorrow, it would be just fine without me, because we're certainly not pushing you to, hey, Rick Burgess is going to be your teacher and your speaker. And matter of fact, I had a young guy, because I was getting so frustrated sometimes with the lack of some materials being out there for men. There's been some pretty good books that have been written by some of my mentors, but really I couldn't find anything in men's ministry that went beyond 6 weeks. And I was in a group that did a 6 weeks one time, and guess what we did on the 7th week? We didn't meet, which is sad, but we didn't. So I said, look, we can try to reach and disciple men the way we wish they would be, or we can reach and disciple them the way they really are. And you probably, if you don't want to keep banging your head on the wall. So a lot of times men are just like, well, what's the next thing? We'll give them the next thing, let them have a plan, let them do it. So the discipleship strategy stands on its own. The thing the Rick and Bubba show has done is it has offered us an opportunity to point people to these resources, but the resources stand on their own. Whether I'm involved in it or not, it's really irrelevant at this point, because it's established that this is, resources that can be consumed by men. And as you hear, we have a team involved. It's a lot bigger than just me, but we also were going to be, why have a resource that the Lord has given and not use it? So the platform has been used because, the Rick and Bubba show is very unique. I don't know that there's another show that is in secular entertainment, but openly Christian. Right. People say, are you Christian radio? And I'm like, well, we're Christians who do radio. And sometimes that can be difficult, because sometimes you find yourself in conversations, you're like, I don't know how we ended up here. I wish we weren't doing this. Right. But when you see, like, I'll give you an example. There was a guy in Sydney, Australia, and I want you to think about this, who loved Frank Caliendo, the comedian. He goes to the Rick and Bubba YouTube channel because he's searching all things Frank Caliendo. He finds us interviewing Frank Caliendo. He finds the Wednesday Bible study that is also on our YouTube channel that I do every Wednesday, and which is also available at TheManChurchcom. And he starts watching the Bible studies. He makes a decision for Christ. He's redeemed by Jesus in Sydney, Australia. He then asked me if I can plug him into a local church in Sydney, Australia. My pastor, Danny Wood, had just come from Sydney, Australia. I call him and say, what churches can we plug this guy into? He tells me we plug the guy into the local church, and now he's being discipled. Well, if I'm not interviewing Frank Caliendo, God's going to always find a way. But you look at that and go, well, see, it's worth it to try that tough thing of in the world and not of the world. And sadly, we don't always get it right. I'm not saying we always get it right. But the platform, it just all has such synergy and works so well together. But the good news is I'm working really hard now that if the Lord takes me home, or the platform is no longer afforded to me, and God says I'm done with this chapter, that this discipleship strategy for men's ministry will live far beyond my life.
Well, I'm excited to see what's going to happen, and great to know that you've got the 122 and building and growing and nationwide, maybe even globally. And I'm guessing it's not just for Baptist churches, correct?
Oh, no, it's, now, I had to wait for my grandmother to pass before I would let other denominations involved. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's funny for you guys. My grandmother, and I'll give you a little anecdote, and I won't take up more of your time, but my grandmother, is staunch Southern Baptist. And so she got the Alabama Baptist paper.
Good for her. Good for her.
No, I mean, she was a subscriber, and she didn't miss one. So, she always was telling me that she thought I was called to be a preacher, and, you're a preacher. And I was like, I don't know about that. And didn't desire to be that, sadly, when I was younger. And so there was this moment where I was actually asked to come and speak to the Alabama Baptists and to the convention.
I was there. I covered you.
Yes, that's right. And so you really need to hear the story then. So my grandmother was getting toward the end of her earthly life when that happened. And I was able to take that article that you did, and I was able to walk into the room with her with only weeks left in her life and say, I'm on the cover of the Alabama Baptist.
Wow.
And for her to see that, it was like, well, then my grandson has arrived. He is in the Alabama Baptist. And so that was something that now, how many times did she get on her knees and pray about that? And for her to think that God was going to had a plan for me that I needed to find and I was not in. And she prayed me right to the submission of the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And for her to have that moment was great.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad we could be part of that journey and that
Yeah,
she got to see that. Well,
that
our
was
team,
great.
yeah, it was a team effort. There were several of us. You were powerful. We had to have an entire team covering. So
Oh, that's good. And I love that. And yeah, so any denomination this works with, I've had people ask me that before. The curriculum is just from the Bible, period. And so there's no theological uh, slant to it other than what the Bible says. I think that as denominations, we've got to do a better job of all coming together on what we agree on and make that more important on the few things we might disagree on.
Great. All right. Well, the resource is the Man Church, TheManChurch, TheManChurch.com, TheManChurch.com. And Rick, thank you again for helping us understand, and we'll just be following your journey.
Well, we love it, and if you know that you need a men's ministry and you've been frustrated over the years of trying to get something to stick, we are getting great reviews. We have a turnkey. We can do anything that you need, and I promise you, a high functioning men's ministry and your church family will radically change the dynamic of the church and the families involved.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
All right.